Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be with you today. Chuck, thank you for joining us. And I'm Doug Duncan, the President and CEO of Leadership Greater Washington. We're on with another one of our frontline conversations of leaders in the region who are doing things with their animals to help us get through COVID and the unrest and everything else, and the economic recession and climate change, everything else that's happening to us. So, Chuck, I want to welcome you here. I want to thank you very much for being part of this. And how are you doing personally? How's life treating you? How's your health?
Well, before I answer that, I want to make sure I bring my dog up, because if this all goes flat, at least, Doug, you've met my dog, Georgie. This is my work companion. George, say hello to everybody. All right. Today is a good day. Felt like a productive week. Board meeting that went well. And Doug, thanks to you and all the other members of the coalition, we had a great event yesterday that I hope that we talk about. Great meeting with staff this morning. You know, they're working on hospitalization rates and personal protective equipment. And right after this, I have a call with leads from the 11 jurisdictions that are participating in our regional racial equity cohort. So today is good. Thanks for asking. My instruction to staff is don't bring me any bad news after 3 o'clock on a Friday. Let me have some semblance of a weekend with nice thoughts and give it to me, Monday morning, first thing. So thanks for asking. Doing well.
So,
at least today.
Before we get started with this, just explain to us what COG is. I mean, people have heard of it. I'm very familiar with it, but some people might not be. So talk to us about the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, what you all do, and what your role in the region is.
Yeah, thank you. And if I need any help, I'm going to call on Todd Turner, who I know is in the chat box. Todd is the council president for Prince George's County, and he's chaired just about everything at the Council of Governments and the Transportation Planning Board. So we are at our core a Metropolitan Planning Organization, or an MPO. There are hundreds of MPOs around the country, and they do work in transportation. COG is an association of members from the district, suburban Maryland, 4 counties. The big jurisdictions in Northern Virginia are all members. So do some things that are kind of imposed by a federal mandate, water, air, transportation, other things that are voluntary that are in the nature of collaboration. Asking the question, what can we do together better than we can do alone?
So what's the population that you cover in COG?
5.7 million. So the Metropolitan Statistical Area includes another handful of rural counties. Brings us up to about 6 million for the MSA, but for COG, from a transportation perspective, it's called the urbanized area. It's kind of like the commute shed. And from a membership perspective, Loudon, Prince William, Charles, Frederick choose to join to be part of COG. So it's about 5.7 million. There's 2 million when COG started in 1957.
And in 10, 20 years, how many are you projecting us to be? How big are you projecting us to be?
So that's one of our biggest challenges. An additional 1.5 million people.
Wow.
So my daughter's part of the chat box here, and she's in Philadelphia. So that's about the population of the city of Philadelphia.
Wow.
Are coming to join us in our region over the next 25 years.
Yeah. So well, let's talk about COVID. What was it like when jurisdictions started issuing orders to stay home, and what did you do at COG, and how did you handle your workforce, and how did you assist other local governments?
Well, I remember the last time I was in a restaurant, same day as the NBA called it quits, European travel ban, and Tom Hanks been infected with a novel coronavirus. So I also had a board meeting that day, and I thought, man, I'm thinking ahead. I'm removing all the extra chairs that we don't need. They're going to sit 6 feet apart. no buffet. We're going to give them box lunches. So apparently I wasn't thinking far ahead enough because everything changed over the next few days. And I think for us, it's kind of dominoes, school system X, the next day school system Y, and then everybody.
Yeah, we thought we'd go home for about 2 weeks and then come back, and it certainly didn't turn out that way.
Yeah, I thought, I had a hunch it was going to be longer. I didn't know it was going to be this long. And so, you know, as an organization, we try to think about COOP plans, continuity of operations plans, but, you know, sending everybody home. So I sent a third of the staff home on one day, tested our system, learned from it. The next day, the next third, and the third day, third, and then said, you know, nobody's coming back till situation clears. So we have 120 staff, and so part of our work was focusing on what are we doing with our own organization, and then part of our work was helping to coordinate what was happening throughout all the member jurisdictions in the region.
So what were you called on to do other than dealing with your office and the people working with COG? What were you called on to do with your member jurisdictions? How did you get involved right away?
Well, I'd say that kind of describe the role as air traffic control. So we're clearly not the pilot. You know, the governors, the mayor, the pilots, the county executives, chairs, they're the pilots, but trying to serve a function of air traffic control. So they're going to choose their flight plan. But we're going to try to make that as visible as possible and as real time as possible to the others. So Maryland's flight plan to go first to shut down in phase 0 and then to ramp up phase 1. What's Virginia's plan? Northern Virginia's plan, distinct from Virginia. What are the dates there? What are the district's plans? So that's kind of the mega. Then throughout all this, Doug, you know, others may not know that we have a whole network of peer committees, subject matter expert committees. So probably of all the committees that we work with and staff, emergency managers, et cetera, probably the Chief Health Officials Committee has been the key one throughout all of this.
So talking about health, what have you learned through the COVID crisis in terms of racial disparities, in terms of health disparities throughout the region?
Well, I think the first weeks into it, folks were just coping. What is this? What is the biology of this? What is the transmission? And then some of the data started coming up, looking at the disparities. And I was on a call with one of our coalition partners, the Community Foundation and United Way. I remember hearing a speaker from the American Public Health Association and articulating what are these disparities for, particularly for Black and Brown people in this crisis. And the phrase that she used, we ought not be talking about pre-existing conditions, we ought to be talking about pre-existing inequities. So that relates to, you know, a body of work that we've been steered into by our chief health officials. It is social determinants of health and all of the factors that affect one's health, lifespan, infant mortality rates, et cetera, that are not clinical. So COVID has unveiled the disparities that were there beforehand. I think it was yesterday we heard a director from the DC Department of Health say some thought this was going to be an equal opportunity pathogen because biologically it's shouldn't affect one group more than another. But if there are comorbidities or other things that are associated that were there before the pathogen, it's going to affect different groups differently. So at our board meeting on Wednesday, through our Chief Health Officers Committee, they released a brief to talk about health equity. And it's just a couple of pages. It's pretty accessible. You can get on our website, but this brief was about a prior report called Uneven Opportunities, and how conditions for wellness vary across the metropolitan region.
And the health disparities really pointed out, as you said, sort of existing inequities. We've been working together for about a year on this Racial Equity Summit. And we had a great session yesterday. So do you want to talk about that some and how that went?
Yeah, I think yesterday was very timely, but also had some antecedents that went back a couple of years. And, a couple shout outs to Leadership Greater Washington here, and also Washington Grantmakers, one person in particular, Tamara Copeland. I think it was in 2017 or 2018 that LGW and Washington Grantmakers did Putting Racism on the Table series.
That's right.
Series of 6. And, you, Tamara, Mark Burgle, other folks said, need to be part of this. And, if you're going to do it, try to make all 6 sessions. And, these sessions were, more closer to a day than a half day. So I thought it was a commitment. But, part of that, the speakers were Dr. Kendi, Robin DiAngelo, and their books are now number 1 and 2 on Amazon. So it was great having them as part of the series. Part of the series also included Carla Bruce. Carla's really emerging as a local luminary, regional luminary in all this, and also Julie Nelson. And Julie is the director of Government Alliance for Race and Equity. And I'd love to talk about our work with GARE if there's time. I guess my point is we did that series, and then LGW and RAG said, how about a civil rights learning journey? And we're going to take, like 5 days. I thought, oh man, how am I going to get 5 days to go to Memphis to Birmingham? And that series, planted a lot of seeds, and that trip was one of the more important trips of my life. So this stuff has been building, and you're right. We set out a year ago, this coalition of the 8 organizations, and we thought the idea of a summit was necessary to be a catalyst to get the region having a broader conversation about these issues. And we set a date, June 11th. We thought maybe we'd get 1,000 people in the room. And it turns out, we didn't need that catalyst. That catalyst came. But thankfully we had that coalition structure in place, and we were able to do that call yesterday. The bad news was we had to turn away people. The good news was we had 500 on the Zoom and maxed out. It was a great conversation. And, there's a couple of things that people said in that yesterday, if you want to talk about that.
So tell us about that. Tell us what struck you from yesterday's gathering.
So when we started the conversation here, you asked me how I was doing, and this has become the norm. Try to ascertain, well, what's people's mind space? There's, co-occurring crises. Are you under stress? And as a white man, get asked that question. And, I know about all the advantages that I have during this crisis. And then there's been a refrain, your Black colleagues are not all right. So gotta ask, gotta inquire. But Tiffany from Montgomery County said, your Black colleagues are not all right, and you shouldn't be either. And, that was one of a great handful of quotes from yesterday. And, I've known Tiffany, maybe I've known Carla and Jacqueline better, but to see her rise and, really learn from her, I think that's connected to Leadership Greater Washington's mission. These series that you're doing, these opportunities, and probably learning from each other is the quickest way to go.
Do you want to talk about GARE some? You'd mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, so it's related to that LGW RAG series. Had a number of speakers, and as the director of COG, when we have somebody from an organization called Government Alliance for Race and Equity, I went to all 6, but I said, that's the one I really need to be at. And starting from there, I put that idea in front of our City County Managers Committee. So City County Managers Committee is, besides my board, which are the elected officials, the City County Managers is kind of the top of the pyramid of all the appointed officials. And we do a retreat every year on a given topic, and it might be collaboration in cybersecurity, maybe something on environment, and it's their option what they want to focus on. And in 2018, they said, well, we'd like to focus on racial equity, and let's give GARE a try. From these city county managers, they said, yep, we need to focus on this. Let's get moving on it. And they appointed representatives to brainstorm with us about COG with what we could do. And the result was a regional racial equity cohort. So we got 11 jurisdictions. Prince George's, Todd Turner, Prince George's is there, Alexandria, DC, and Loudoun, and Charles, Fairfax, Montgomery. So each of the jurisdictions has between 5 and 15 appointed officials, and they might be from human services or housing, transportation, corrections. So it's a broad array. And this group of 100 from 11 jurisdictions have been going through a year-long process, a day a month, with facilitated training by GARE. So they're working normalizing these conversations, so it's a little bit easier to talk about, understanding about the history, and then planning how to make change inside their jurisdiction. So it's not all a cerebral exercise. And I know that the county manager from Arlington meets with his group of a dozen every month. What'd you learn? What should we be doing? So I feel fortunate that this has been in place, so that there's some intellectual infrastructure within all of these jurisdictions. When we started this, there was not a chief equity officer in the region, and now there are at least 3, and a couple more are in the search for a chief equity officer. And I should make a disclaimer, like Carla Bruce from Fairfax County said yesterday, just having a chief equity officer is not the thing, but it's to develop a racial equity lens in development of all policy. And I'd be happy to give a couple examples if you're interested.
So you've been doing this about a year, you said?
Yeah, they started last September, and the cohort of 100 was to conclude in June. Of course, we had to take the in-person energy of 100 people in a room, go virtual April, May. But this group has decided they're not going to be done in June. They're going to continue, and they're going to continue with a COVID lens into the coming year. So that 100 will continue, and we're going to start another 100 from another dozen jurisdictions of the region. And when will we start it? Maybe January. I think we feel it's important to start this in person. So we're going to have another cohort.
So different jurisdictions, or some of the same ones that are in the current one?
We're going to prioritize different jurisdictions. Make sure, because we maxed out and I had to have a couple conversations. Mr. Bean, you mean we can't get in? Sorry, but what you get you in the next one. So it'll be some different jurisdictions, but Fairfax, Montgomery, others, I think that they'll send another dozen people.
So we mentioned earlier, we've been planning this racial summit for over a year, and we had the virtual gathering yesterday. And your group's been meeting for a year now, doing things. So what are you expecting from that? What are you expecting from this group, particularly with the calls for police reform and other things? I mean, it would seem that we would be much further along in a reform process because of the work that COG has been doing, because of the work that you've been doing of pulling people together.
Yeah, I think like the panelists said yesterday, while there's a appetite to, start with change 1 and also do change 2, I think it was Jacqueline from Alexandria. Well, we really need to do all of that. We need to be working across things that are apparent and in the news, as well as things that are a little wonky, like infrastructure, public infrastructure. So I think that these appointed officials that are part of the cohort, I think that they'll help. But elected officials I know are on this, looking at use of force and duty to intervene and other best practice policies.
You're absolutely right. I mentioned police reform, but we're looking at housing reform. We're looking at potentially a number of evictions coming up soon. We're looking at education reform. We're looking at health reform. We've seen the health disparities that are coming. It really is across the board. I mean, people's energies are focused on the police reform now, police accountability, but you can't solve that if you don't solve all the other ones as well. I mean, it's got to be this huge approach.
Yeah, I think the one that's been also with us for decades is related to housing and land use and zoning. And I think looking at things through a racial equity lens, you look at a discipline like housing, single family versus multifamily and apartment. And then look at, well, who's in this part of town and who's in that part of town? And look at the historical antecedents that led us there. So some of those things are more current to the conversation, but GEAR also helps us look at other things like trash transfer stations. So you look at a jurisdiction, where's the trash transferred? Those are actual stations. And then you put on a ward or a district map on, and you wonder, well, why does it seem like those trash transfer stations all are in that part of town? Or it might be a little bit more subtle, like streetlights. And how come this neighborhood has more broken streetlights or non-functioning streetlights than another? And the answer might be in just processes. If the process is that someone needs to call to get a streetlight fixed, maybe that happens more readily in neighborhood A than neighborhood B. So maybe there ought to be a different process. And Doug, you run a government, so life cycle of infrastructure, maybe the answer is more, well, how long is the streetlight supposed to live for? And maybe we ought to just automatically replace all the streetlights on that four-year cycle. So looking at things that are in the news, but also looking at things that are maybe more mundane or public infrastructure wonky.
Let's talk about the recent unrest that we've seen in the district and really around the world. One of the great things I think about this region is the mutual aid agreements that we got all over here, where if someone needs something, the others will respond. And I'm sure we saw a lot of that with what was happening in DC and other jurisdictions coming in to help. But we saw something this time where Arlington County actually pulled back from a mutual aid commitment. Can you talk about that a little bit? That was I don't think I've ever seen that before.
Yeah, when we think about the law enforcement agencies in our region, We're going to think about MPD in the district and Montgomery and Prince George's, but there are also a number of law enforcement agencies that are federal. So Park Police, Capitol Police, et cetera. So mutual aid agreements have existed throughout the region, and mutual aid, automatic aid, memoranda of understanding, memoranda of agreement, COG is, sometimes I see it as an MOU factory. So jurisdiction A and B want to do something, or A, B, C, and D want to do something. How do we share information about hospitalization rates across the region in the COVID crisis? How do we share that data? Because there's a Maryland process, there's a DC process, there's a Virginia process, and how, if we want situational awareness about what's the hospital capacity in the region, then we need to define what's the mutual interest, what are the goals, and it often ends up in a mutual, in a memorandum of understanding. So getting into your question, mutual aid, there's mutual aid agreements also in fire departments. Often those can be automatic aid. So if there's a fire right across the jurisdictional border, that fire department will help serve. And mutual aid can also exist not just between the local jurisdictions, but between these federal law enforcement agencies. So I think that's what the Arlingtonians saw a problem as that Monday with the removal of the protesters from Lafayette Square for what's been called a photo op. So Arlington had been there, mutual aid with the Park Police. And I think what leaders in Arlington saw unfolding on TV said, that's not where we want to be. And so mutual aid, Arlington has that option to pull its force back, and that's what it did.
Well, I thought that was a remarkable statement by them. Again, I don't recall any other instance of somebody doing that, but they really took a stand and said, we think this is violating people's constitutional rights, and we think this is wrong.
Yeah.
Or we're not going to be a part of it. We're going to pull back. So.
Yeah, it's the first time that I remember it. And, you know, these kind of collaborative agreements in the region on emergency response go back to the Air Florida crash, right in the Potomac River, and between Virginia and DC, all these agreements weren't in place. The response was suboptimal. That was improved, and response to 9/11, the response at the Pentagon. Fire chief from Arlington was the incident commander, working with some federal entities, you know, the Pentagon and FBI. But in the
and Montgomery County fire was responsible for putting out the rooftop fire of the Pentagon. I mean, everybody was involved in that. It's really was
everybody's involved. Based on the lessons of the prior decade, things were smoothed out, and well, there are hundreds of pages written about terrible lessons learned from New York. This is one of the brighter spots in the after 9/11.
And I know this is a while ago, but I will say the mutual aid during the sniper shootings was just incredible. I mean, people were there without even asking for them. They were there helping and coordinating and doing things. So it worked really well then too.
So it works well. We have a police chiefs committee that meets every month, and there's probably tougher conversations amongst that committee. You know, our organization is not going to be telling any jurisdiction what it ought to be doing. Our lane is focusing on optimizing the collaboration or coordination communication between those agencies.
So have you seen, I mean, I keep talking about this as a time not just of this unrest and COVID, but the economic recession, if not depression, climate change, terrorism still out there. I mean, there's all kinds of forces at play here. And with the anthrax attacks, with the sniper shooting, you can sort of focus on one thing. How do you see that impacting the elected officials in the top appointed officials? The stress level they must be under is really incredible now.
It is incredible trying to figure this all out, be responsive to the community. So the phrase that I picked up on this week is co-occurring crises. So the pandemic suppressed the economy, suppression and recession, and then racial disparities became top of mind. And as you said, the climate crisis. So this is, more than we experienced in the Great Recession just a decade ago, and it has more complicated aspects than 9/11, and so it's everything all at once. I think. Do you remember like December 2019? We were like, oh man, can't wait to get rid of 2019 and get into 2020. and here we are. But I think from our perspective, is a phrase that's often used. It's best not to be exchanging business cards at the time of the disaster. So we have an emergency managers committee that meets every month. The chair rotates every year, a chair from Maryland, chair from Virginia, housing directors, planning directors. I don't know, I didn't see Carla Reed from WSSC. I think she might be on, working with all of the water utilities of the region. So those folks are problem solving, they're learning from each other. And so when something like this hits, we're a little bit more ready to respond in a more coordinated way.
No, you're right. It sure does help to have people that you're familiar with that you can call on, not just for support and having their units come help, but just for advice, guidance, feedback, brainstorming, those kinds of things. It's extraordinarily helpful.
Yeah.
We've had in the past. And COG is a big part of that. I'm sure you talk about these monthly meetings. I'm sure they have accelerated to much more than once a month over what we've seen the last couple of months.
Yeah, under normal circumstances, the health officers committee would be meeting on a monthly basis, and they'd have some long-term horizon looking at social determinants of health, et cetera. But some of them have been through Ebola and Zika. They didn't really affect our region, but we thought that they could. This affected the region hundredfold, but some of the social capital was there. The relationships were there. So I think from our perspective, there's kind of two different kinds of roles. I talked about the relationships that are built before the event. So this is helping to coordinate in the middle of a crisis. There's another aspect to our work where I'd like to say the future of the region is our business. So it's pretty hard to be thinking about 2022 right now when like every day has had its own character for the last 3 months. But that's what we're going to be trying to do over the next few months. And I kind of picked 2022 as that's something that's post-vaccine, readily available. So what we're in right now is not a new normal. It's a abnormality. It's gone on for weeks. It's going to go on for months. But trying to figure out what are all the disruptions that have happened in 2020. What's it going to mean for the long-term planning of the region? And we don't really know. I'm working at home today. You are. Several dozen of folks that are on here are probably have the opportunity to be at home. So what's that mean for telework in our region? We don't really know. It's going to grow, but is it going to be transformative? So at the beginning, you asked me how many people do we have? How many people we expect? Roughly 6 million, and expect another 1.5 million. You think, geez, where are they all going to go? That's one of the strategic imperatives, one of the challenges for the region. But we, might also be asking, what are our assumptions about jobs? Because the population comes because of an economy. housing that's needed for that population. And how will they get to those places of employment? So we don't have that data, we don't have that crystal ball, but that's why I'm using the year 2022. What's changed over the last few months, and what will things be like in 2022?
Hey, you mentioned the new normal. We're calling it the dynamic normal because every day it changes. It just, what is normal changes every day, and that's going to continue for quite some time. Really, as you said, until we get a vaccine and get everybody inoculated.
Yeah.
And with the CDC, some of their rules, they're saying, when you go back to work, don't take public transit, drive alone in your car. And I mean, just think about if the people taking Metro are now in cars, it's gridlock everywhere. It's gridlock anywhere, but it's gridlock everywhere in this region with that.
Yeah.
You know, people getting comfortable to ride Metro again. It's going to be quite some time, I think. Well, but so one observation I have is in terms of these stay-at-home requests, orders, whatever, I think we're past that now. I think the Republicans went past, basically said, we're not doing that anymore. And now with all the protests, the Democrats have sort of done the same thing. So if COVID gets worse and people say you need to stay at home, I'm not sure the public's going to listen to that. It's going to be a very difficult time for that. So we're going to have to focus a lot more on social distancing, and masks, and things like that, because people are going to be out and about. Because I don't think that our electeds can say stay home with a straight face anymore.
So one of the things that I try to do in the midst of everything that we need to, for my own learning, I'm part of we don't really call it a learning community because it sounds too hokey, but half dozen executive directors of COGs from around the country. So Seattle and Houston and Atlanta and Boston. What's happening there? What are you working on? And I remember a conversation in early March, the Seattle COG director, remember going back, Seattle was, and he was saying, yeah, I think the Mariners are going to start the season without any fans. It's the first time I ever heard anybody say something like that. I thought, whoa, this is something different. So now we're here in mid-June, and your question, we go Virginia, Northern Virginia just went to phase 2 today. Montgomery, Prince George's, maybe next week. The district no earlier than June 19th, which is only 10 days away. It's all pretty close. But I was on the phone yesterday with the Houston COG director, and they didn't shut down like we did. And the Houston Chronicle headline today is Houston on the precipice of a disaster. So we're seeing some of the southern states that didn't flatten the curve. So it's Friday, and my Good News Friday, try to man, we are coordinated as a region, even though we're working with Maryland and Virginia. And then Monday morning, we'll pick up the more troubling thread of wave 2, what could happen.
So Carla Reed gave a shout out to you after you gave a shout out to her. And I think Derek Leon Davis did the same thing. He's on the call as well.
Derek's on the line?
There you go.
I have, let me give a shout out to Derek. I have a awesome board, great executive committee, chaired by Derek. Christian Dorsey was on COJO just before this, and Robert White from the district, great executive committee. They issued a great statement on the death of George Floyd on June 1. So it's been great working with all of them. I think on our region, on my board, I probably had the most, I've been at COG going on 8 years. It was probably the biggest shift as a result of the November elections than I had experienced in all my 8 years. So it's probably most pronounced in Prince William County. I remember somebody telling me, future Chuck, you need to be thinking the underlying demographics in Prince William County, majority people of color. I thought, that's true with the politics that they had. Well, then a transformative election in Prince William County. You look at Chair Randall in Loudoun County. So I thought November was like a big change for our region. And then came the co-occurring crises. So more change to come.
So our chair, Mahan Tavakoli, has a couple questions, or one question. What are two short-term priorities that the region needs, and what are two medium to long-term priorities that we should be focused on?
I think the short term, the immediate term is to, steer the ship. And we really know that it's many ships, go back to my air traffic controller analogy, we can't rush. Phase 2 is basically upon us, but we can't rush a phase 3, things that are more risky. So that's the short term, the immediate term. I think the next would be seize the moment on racial equity. So, not just the issues, like we said before, that are in the headlines, but what are all aspects of how we work together as a society, a city, or a county? So look for those opportunities. If I would more broader strokes, what's been with us is diversify the economy. So I don't know how old my interviewer is, but once upon a time, 1/3 of the whole workforce in the region were federal workers, and that's gone down. And by diversifying the economy, it enables us to be more resilient. So we're down to about 11% of the total workforce is federal workers. So we got to diversify the economy. And I think this mantra, diversify the economy, is going to morph over the next year to inclusionary economic development. So it is awesome that we won the biggest economic development contest in history with HQ2. And it's awesome that even in this suppression recession, Microsoft says we're going to move 1,500 people to Reston. I think what's going to be more and more called for is inclusionary economic development.
So you call this Good News Friday. Do you have any? What good news have you gotten over the last couple of months? What's some good news you can share with us?
Coming up for consideration by the COG board, National Capital Trails Network, bicycling. So I think it's like 1,400 miles of off-road bicycle trails. So Montgomery County has some, the district has some, but this is the idea to really make a network so that you can have a bicycle beltway all around the region, and then these spurs. So half of it is built, it's not all the way connected. So that's coming up. TPB is going to look at it, and COG board is going to look at it. So I think what's seizing the moment, MARC VRE rail run through. So rather than MARC and VRE both stop at Union Station, there's increasing probability that we can figure out not just have commuter rail, but regional rail service, so you can get a one-stop seat from Frederick down to Crystal City, from Crystal City up to New Carrollton. So that's a possibility. Coming up, we got we have a robust environmental programs department and policy committees that look at environment and energy as well as water. So I'm expecting us to, the COG board, to set regional greenhouse gas mitigation goals for 2030. How much we need to reduce by 2030. We did this a decade ago for 2020. This is before I was there. And they set a goal for 2050. Who's going to be around in 2050? That's something. But we didn't set a 2031. So we're going to do that. We're going to do that this year too.
That's great. Chuck, any LGW members or that have reached out to you in the last couple of months to help? Anybody you've relied on at LGW? Yeah,
I think I get a nice supportive shout outs from my class of 2005, Helping the Region Thrive. Kurt presented to the COG board with Washington Regional Alcohol Program, presented to the COG board just a couple months ago. Thanks, Mahan, for that question. Mahan has been a personal coach to me. I've had basically two professional coaches in my career. I've had lots of mentors, BB and Jan and Tamar and others, but Mahan, and the other one was John Tidings. So one of the founders of LGW. So when Mahan stepped up to coach me, he had some big shoes to fill, and he did it. But I'm running into LGW members, all the time. My board chair, Derek Davis, so excited. A number of other COG board members, our partners that put together the 500-person event on racial equity. Rosie and Glenn and others. I think we live in a big region. For those of you on the call that maybe were born here, that had maybe some semblance, this is kind of a southern town. This is the 5th biggest metro economy in the country. This is big, complicated stuff here. And we do a good job, I think, of finding the win-win in various issues, water utilities, et cetera, police, housing. But LGW, I don't know if I ever said this to you, Doug, but LGW is like a strategic can of WD-40. So spraying in just the right place, so that when I meet a new person and we're going to work on some housing targets, or we're going to be working on X, it just makes it a lot easier for us to skip the formalities and get right down to the content. So LGW has a strategic role in making this region move forward.
That's very nice, Chad. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And that's a great way to describe it. You're right. When you have that LGW connection, the trust is automatically built in. So it makes things move a lot more smoothly. And that's what John Tidings and the other founders had in mind when they started Leadership Washington back then in 1982.
Greasing the skids. So Carla at WSSC. So when there's a new general manager, CEO at DC Water, he needs to be part of LGW. All the other utilities do. And whether it's public safety or city county managers, it helps grease the skids. So thanks for accepting that WD-40 metaphor, at least for this brief conversation.
We're trying to, is it DC WD-40, LGW D-40, maybe that's the one?
LGW D-40.
We'll come up with something. Mahan said to tell you that in the chat that he has learned more from you than anything he's taught you. So that was very kind of him.
Doesn't that sound just like Mahan?
It does.
Yeah, it's those people that say, yeah, this is really a team effort, that that they're a leader.
Chuck, I want to thank you for your time today. I want to thank you for all your leadership in the region. COG really is an important player in keeping the region together and keeping us moving forward. We will have 2 more of these Frontline conversations on Monday, one with Michael Milcar and one with Kathy Gorman from Children's Medical Center. So, Chuck, the final word for today.
So what do you think of my virtual background? I just did this morning. Is it hokey? What do you think?
I like it. I got to get a virtual one somehow too. I got to figure that out.
All right.
Yeah, I like it. I like
well, final shout out to my 2005 classmates. Glad to be here, trying to rep you.
I'm a little biased because looking at you, right above your right shoulder is the Montgomery County map. So with the city of Rockville drawn in there. That's my hometown. So, Chuck, thank you so much. Have a great weekend, everybody. Carla Reed just says she loves the COG background. So.
I'll take that as perfect affirmation then.
All right, Chuck. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, LGW.